Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness happen when we least expect them, from people we never imagined would care. In a world where strangers pass by without a second glance, where poverty is met with judgment rather than compassion, one weathered cowboy proved that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear worn leather boots and carry hearts bigger than the open range they call home. This is the story of how a single moment of human decency changed two lives forever, reminding us that dignity and hope can be restored with just 4 simple words. Come with me tonight. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty parking lot of Miller's General Store as Sarah Mitchell clutched her worn purse against her chest, counting the crumpled bills one more time. $3.47. The same amount she had counted 5 times already, hoping somehow the numbers would magically change. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that the single piece of toast she'd eaten that morning was now a distant memory. Sarah pushed through the glass doors of the store, the familiar chime announcing her arrival. The cool air conditioning hit her face, a welcome relief from the Texas heat that had been building all day. She moved slowly through the aisles, her eyes scanning the shelves for anything that might stretch her meager budget. A loaf of bread for 99 cents. A small jar of peanut butter for $2.50. The math was simple, but it still left her short. Behind the counter, Mrs. Henderson watched Sarah with narrowed eyes. The store owner's wife had seen Sarah come in several times over the past few weeks, always counting money, always buying the cheapest items available. Mrs. Henderson prided herself on running a respectable establishment, and she didn't appreciate what she saw as charity cases making her other customers uncomfortable. Sarah finally approached the counter with a small loaf of bread and a jar of store-brand peanut butter. She placed the items carefully on the counter and began counting out her money again, laying each bill and coin down with deliberate precision. Mrs. Henderson rang up the items without looking at Sarah, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "That'll be $3.78, Mrs. Henderson announced, her voice cold and businesslike. Sarah's heart sank. She had hoped the prices might be lower than she remembered, but her calculations had been correct. She was 31 cents short. Her hands trembled slightly as she counted her money one more time, spreading it across the counter in a desperate hope that somehow she had miscounted. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought I had enough. Could I maybe put back the peanut butter and just take the bread?" Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened. She had dealt with this type of customer before, and she wasn't in the mood for what she saw as manipulation or begging. "Honey, this isn't a charity. If you can't afford to shop here, maybe you should try the food bank on the other side of town." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt her cheeks burning with shame as she noticed other customers beginning to turn and stare. A young mother with 2 children in tow shifted uncomfortably, pulling her kids closer. An elderly man in overalls shook his head disapprovingly. Sarah wished the ground would open up and swallow her whole. "I understand," Sarah managed to say, her voice shaking. "I'll just take the bread then." "The bread is still 99 cents, Mrs. Henderson replied sharply. "And, with tax, that's 107. You're still short." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. She had been so focused on getting enough food to last her through the weekend that she had forgotten about tax. Her unemployment benefits had run out 2 weeks ago, and despite applying to dozens of jobs, she hadn't heard back from anyone. The small savings she had managed to accumulate during better times had been steadily depleted by rent, utilities, and basic necessities. "Please," Sarah said quietly, looking directly at Mrs. Henderson. "I haven't eaten anything substantial in 2 days. I'm not asking for charity. I'm just asking if maybe you could let the tax slide this once. I promise I'll pay you back the 8 cents as soon as I can." Mrs. Henderson's expression grew even colder. "I don't run a credit operation, and I don't make exceptions. If you can't afford to shop here, you need to leave. You're holding up the line and making my other customers uncomfortable." Sarah looked behind her and realized that indeed, several customers had gathered in line behind her, all watching the exchange with varying degrees of sympathy and annoyance. She felt exposed and humiliated, like a spotlight was shining on her poverty for everyone to see and judge. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," Sarah said, gathering her money back into her purse. Her hands were shaking now, She dropped 2 quarters on the floor. As she bent to pick them up, she could hear Mrs. Henderson letting out an exaggerated sigh of frustration. Just as Sarah was about to leave empty-handed, she heard the door chime ring again. Heavy footsteps echoed across the linoleum floor, accompanied by the soft jingle of spurs. She didn't turn around, too embarrassed to make eye contact with yet another witness to her humiliation. The footsteps approached the counter, and Sarah caught a glimpse of worn leather boots and faded jeans from her peripheral vision. The newcomer was tall, she could tell that much, and he carried with him the scent of leather, hay, and honest work under the sun. "Afternoon, Mrs. Henderson," came a deep, weathered voice with a slight drawl. "Beautiful day out there, isn't it?" "Oh, hello there, Jake." Mrs. Henderson's voice immediately warmed. "Yes, it certainly is. How's the ranch treating you?" "Can't complain," the man replied. "The cattle are healthy, and we got good rain last week. Can't ask for much more than that." Sarah stood frozen at the counter, unsure whether she should try to slip past this Jake person or wait for him to finish his conversation with Mrs. Henderson. She could feel the eyes of the other customers still on her, and she wanted nothing more than to disappear. "Now then," Jake continued, his voice carrying a calm authority, "I couldn't help but notice this young lady here seems to be having a bit of trouble. What exactly is the situation?" Mrs. Henderson's voice took on a defensive tone. "It's nothing for you to worry about, Jake. This girl here is trying to buy groceries she can't afford. I was just explaining to her that this is a business, not a charity." Sarah felt her face burning with renewed shame. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, studying the scuffed pattern of the linoleum tiles, wishing she could just vanish into them. "I see," Jake said slowly. Sarah could hear him shifting his weight, the leather of his boots creaking softly. "And how much is she short?" 31 cents, Mrs. Henderson replied, her tone suggesting that the amount was irrelevant to the principle of the matter. There was a moment of silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She was acutely aware of every sound in the store. The hum of the refrigerators, the soft rustle of someone checking their shopping list, the distant sound of children playing in the parking lot. "Well now," Jake said finally, his voice gentle but firm, 31 cents doesn't seem like something worth making a fuss over. Why don't you go ahead and ring up her groceries, and I'll cover the difference." "That's very kind of you, Jake," Mrs. Henderson said, though her tone suggested she thought his kindness was misplaced. "But I don't think that's—" "I insist," Jake interrupted, and though his voice remained polite, there was an unmistakable finality to it. "Ring up her groceries, please." Sarah finally looked up, turning to see her unexpected benefactor for the first time. Jake appeared to be in his late 40s, with silver threading through his dark hair beneath a well-worn cowboy hat. His face was weathered by years of sun and wind, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of both hard work and frequent laughter. Those eyes, a warm brown like rich coffee, were currently fixed on Mrs. Henderson with quiet determination. "You don't have to do that," Sarah said quickly, her voice small and uncertain. "I can't accept charity from a stranger." Jake turned to look at her then, and his expression was so kind and understanding that Sarah felt tears threatening again. "It's not charity, miss. It's just one neighbor helping another. We all need a hand sometimes, and there's no shame in that." Mrs. Henderson, clearly outnumbered and unwilling to argue further with one of her regular customers, began ringing up Sarah's items with obvious reluctance. The register beeped and whirred as she scanned the bread and peanut butter. "That'll be $3.78, she announced, her voice flat. Jake reached into his worn wallet and pulled out a $5 bill, placing it on the counter next to Sarah's carefully counted money. "Keep the change," he told Mrs. Henderson. "Maybe you could put it toward helping the next person who finds themselves a little short." Mrs. Henderson's lips pursed, but she took the money and made change for Sarah's portion, handing over the bread and peanut butter in a small paper bag. "Thank you for shopping at Miller's," she said stiffly, though the words were clearly directed at Jake rather than Sarah. Sarah took the bag with trembling hands, her mind reeling from the unexpected kindness. She had been prepared for judgment, for humiliation, for walking away with nothing. Instead, this stranger had stepped in and restored not just her ability to eat, but a measure of her dignity as well. "Thank you." she managed to say to Jake, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you." Jake touched the brim of his hat politely. "No need for repayment, miss. Like I said, we all need help sometimes." He paused, studying her face with those kind brown eyes. Something in her expression, perhaps the hollow look of someone who had been hungry for too long, or the way she clutched the small bag like it contained precious treasure, seemed to touch something in him. "Tell me," he said gently, "when's the last time you had a proper meal?" Sarah's cheeks flushed again, but something in Jake's tone made her want to answer honestly. "I had some toast this morning," she admitted quietly. "I meant a real meal," Jake said. "Meat and potatoes, vegetables, the kind of food that sticks to your ribs." Sarah couldn't meet his eyes. "It's been a while," she whispered. Jake was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could sense him making some kind of decision. The other customers had finished their transactions and left, leaving just the three of them in the store. Mrs. Henderson busied herself with rearranging items behind the counter, clearly trying to pretend she wasn't listening to their conversation. "Listen," Jake said finally, his voice low and earnest. "I don't know what circumstances brought you to this point, and it's none of my business unless you want it to be. But I do know that nobody should have to choose between dignity and dinner." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've got a ranch about 10 miles out of town. Nothing fancy, but there's always food on the table and honest work to be done. If you're willing to earn your keep, you're welcome to stay for a while. Get back on your feet." Sarah stared at him in shock. "I couldn't possibly," she began. But Jake held up a gentle hand. "Before you say no, just think about it. You'd have your own room, 3 meals a day, and I could use help with the books and general ranch maintenance. It's not charity, it's employment. Fair wages for fair work." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "And I make a mean pot of chili that's about ready to come off the stove right now." The kindness in his offer was overwhelming. Sarah felt tears beginning to spill down her cheeks, and she wiped them away quickly with the back of her hand. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Jake adjusted his hat and gave her a small, sad smile. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be down on your luck with nowhere to turn. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to give you a chance to change everything." Sarah looked down at the small bag of groceries in her hands, then back at Jake's weathered, honest face. She thought about her empty apartment, her dwindling hope, her growling stomach. She thought about the job applications that went unanswered and the mounting bills she couldn't pay. Then she thought about this stranger's unexpected kindness and the possibility of a fresh start. "Come with me," Jake said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying more warmth and promise than she had heard in months. "You won't go hungry tonight." Sarah sat in the passenger seat of Jake's old pickup truck, watching the Texas landscape roll by through dusty windows. The vehicle was well-maintained despite its age, with worn leather seats that had molded to accommodate years of ranch work. The dashboard was clean and organized, with a thermos of coffee secured in a cup holder and a stack of receipts held down by a small horseshoe paperweight. Country music played softly from the radio, mixing with the gentle rumble of the engine and the whistle of wind through the partially open windows. She had agreed to come with Jake after several more minutes of gentle persuasion. The deciding factor hadn't been his promise of food or shelter, though both were desperately needed. It had been the way he looked at her, without judgment or pity, but with the same respect he might show any person deserving of basic human dignity. In a world that had recently seemed determined to grind her down, his simple kindness felt revolutionary. "So tell me about yourself," Jake said as they turned onto a long gravel road flanked by wooden fence posts. "What kind of work did you do before things got tough?" Sarah had been dreading this question, knowing it would inevitably come up. Her story wasn't particularly dramatic or unique, which somehow made it feel more shameful. "I was an administrative assistant at a marketing firm in Houston," she said quietly. "Davis and Associates. I worked there for 3 years." "That sounds like steady work," Jake observed, slowing the truck to navigate around a particularly large pothole. "What happened?" "The company downsized," Sarah explained, her voice flat with the weariness of having told this story to unemployment counselors and potential employers. "They eliminated my position along with 12 others. Said they were restructuring to focus on digital marketing and didn't need as much administrative support. Jake nodded sympathetically. I've seen a lot of that lately. Technology changing the way businesses operate, leaving good people behind through no fault of their own. How long ago was this? For months, Sarah said. I thought it would be easy to find something else. I mean, I had good references and solid experience. But every place I applied either wanted someone with different skills or was offering wages that wouldn't even cover my rent. The truck crested a small hill, and Jake pointed ahead to a collection of buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling pastures. That's home, he said simply. Sarah found herself leaning forward to get a better look. The main house was a sprawling single-story structure with a wide front porch supported by rough-hewn posts. The white paint was beginning to show its age, but the building looked solid and well-maintained. Several outbuildings dotted the property, a large red barn, what appeared to be a workshop or garage, and a smaller structure that might have been a guest house or office. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, black dots against the golden grass. It's beautiful, Sarah said, and she meant it. After months of struggling in the concrete and asphalt jungle of the city, the open space and natural beauty felt like balm to her soul. It's been in my family for 3 generations, Jake said with obvious pride. My grandfather bought this land in 1952 with money he saved working oil rigs. Built most of these buildings with his own hands. He paused, and Sarah detected a note of sadness in his voice. I'm the last one left to take care of it. As they approached the house, Sarah could see that Jake hadn't exaggerated about the ranch needing help. While everything was structurally sound, there were clear signs that one person was struggling to maintain it all. The porch could use a fresh coat of paint. Weeds were growing up around the foundation, and several fence posts in the distance appeared to be leaning at precarious angles. Jake parked the truck near the front porch and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt profound after the constant noise of city life that Sarah had grown accustomed to. She could hear birds singing, cattle lowing in the distance, and the gentle rustle of wind through the grass. It was peaceful in a way she had almost forgotten existed. Come on, Jake said, climbing out of the truck. Let me show you around, and then we'll get some food in you. The front porch was wide and inviting, furnished with 2 rocking chairs and a small table. Wind chimes hung from the eaves, creating a gentle melody in the afternoon breeze. Jake opened the front door, which Sarah noticed wasn't locked, and gestured for her to enter. The interior of the house was exactly what Sarah had imagined a ranch house would look like. The living room featured comfortable furniture arranged around a stone fireplace, with Navajo rugs on hardwood floors and family photographs scattered across the mantelpiece. Everything was clean and organized, but there was a distinctly masculine feel to the space that suggested a man living alone. Kitchen's this way, Jake said, leading her through a dining room dominated by a large oak table. I spend most of my time in here when I'm inside. The kitchen was large and functional, with white cabinets, butcher block countertops, and a massive gas range that looked like it could cook for a small army. The promised pot of chili was indeed simmering on the stove, filling the room with rich, spicy aromas that made Sarah's stomach clench with hunger. A round table sat near the windows, offering a view of the backyard and the pastures beyond. Smells incredible, Sarah said, and Jake smiled with genuine pleasure. Secrets in the chocolate, he said. Just a little bit, but it makes all the difference. My grandmother's recipe. She taught me to cook when I was 12, said any man who couldn't feed himself was only half a man. He moved to the stove and lifted the lid on the pot, stirring the contents with a wooden spoon. This'll be ready in about 20 minutes. In the meantime, let me show you where you'd be staying. They walked back through the house and down a short hallway lined with more family photographs. Sarah caught glimpses of what appeared to be 3 generations of the same family, stern-faced grandparents in sepia tones, a younger couple who must have been Jake's parents, and various shots of Jake himself at different ages, often in the company of a pretty blonde woman who appeared frequently in the more recent photos. This would be your room, Jake said, opening a door near the end of the hall. The bedroom was simple but comfortable, with a double bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser, and a small desk positioned near the window. Like the rest of the house, everything was scrupulously clean. The window offered a view of the barn and the rolling hills beyond. There's a private bathroom right here, Jake said, opening another door to reveal a small but modern bathroom with clean white fixtures, fresh towels in the cabinet, and the water heater's new, so you don't have to worry about running out of hot water. Sarah stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of privacy and cleanliness. Her apartment in town had been a studio with a bathroom she shared with 3 other units. The idea of having her own space, her own bathroom, seemed almost too good to be true. "What would you expect from me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice businesslike despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I mean, what kind of work would I be doing?" Jake leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "Well, like I mentioned, I could use help with the books. I'm good with cattle and fixing fence, but paperwork's never been my strong suit. Bills need paying, records need keeping, and I've got a computer in the office that I barely know how to turn on." He gestured toward the window. "Then, there's general maintenance around the place. Nothing too heavy, but there's always something that needs fixing or cleaning or organizing. Garden could use tending. House could use a woman's touch here and there." He paused. "And if you're interested and willing to learn, I could teach you about ranch work. Cattle need checking, horses need grooming, equipment needs maintenance." "Horses?" Sarah asked, surprised by her own interest. Jake's eyes lit up. "You like horses?" "I used to," Sarah admitted. "I took riding lessons when I was younger, but I haven't been around horses in years. Well, I've got 3 horses that could use more attention than I've been able to give them lately. One of them, Luna, is getting on in years and would probably love having someone to fuss over her." They made their way back to the kitchen, where Jake ladled generous portions of chili into 2 bowls. He added a dollop of sour cream and a sprinkling of cheese to each, then pulled a pan of cornbread from the oven. The bread was golden brown and smelled like heaven. "Go ahead and sit down," Jake said, setting a bowl in front of Sarah along with a thick slice of cornbread. "There's butter on the table, and help yourself to whatever you need." Sarah took her first bite and nearly moaned with pleasure. The chili was rich and complex, with just enough heat to warm her from the inside out. The beef was tender, the beans perfectly cooked, and she could taste the hint of chocolate Jake had mentioned. It was the best thing she had eaten in months. "This is amazing," she said between bites. "You weren't kidding about your grandmother's recipe." Jake settled into his own chair with obvious satisfaction. She was quite a cook. Used to say that food was love made visible, and you could tell everything you needed to know about a person by how they fed their family and guests. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the distant lowing of cattle. Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks, the combination of good food and Jake's easy presence working magic on her frayed nerves. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. Why are you doing this?" "Really? I mean, picking up strays from the grocery store can't be a regular hobby of yours." Jake was quiet for a long moment, pushing a bean around his bowl with his spoon. When he looked up, his brown eyes held a sadness that seemed to come from deep experience. "I told you I knew what it was like to be down on your luck," he said slowly. "That wasn't just talk. About 2 years ago, I lost almost everything. Bad investments, cattle disease, equipment failures, you name it. I was looking at losing the ranch that's been in my family for 70 years. He took a sip of water before continuing. "I was too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to admit I was in over my head. I probably would have lost everything if it hadn't been for my neighbor, old Tom Hartley. He showed up one day with his checkbook and a loan offer that had terms no bank would ever give. Saved my family's legacy and probably my sanity." Sarah could see the emotion in his face as he spoke. "Tom said something I'll never forget. He said that when you've got more than you need, and you see someone who doesn't have enough, arithmetic isn't complicated. You share what you can." "What happened to Tom?" Sarah asked softly. "Heart attack last winter. He was 83 and still working his own ranch every day until the end." Jake's voice was thick with affection and grief. "Before he died, he made me promise that I'd pass on the kindness when I had the chance. Said it was the only way to keep his legacy alive." Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes again. "So I'm your way of keeping a promise to a friend." Jake looked at her seriously. "No, Sarah. You're a person who deserves a chance to get back on your feet, same as anyone else. The promise just gave me the courage to offer what I should have offered anyway. They finished their meal as the sun began to set outside the kitchen windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah helped Jake clear the dishes, and they worked together in comfortable silence, establishing an easy rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. So, Jake said as he hung up the dish towel, "What do you think? Ready to give ranch life a try?" Sarah looked around the warm, welcoming kitchen, thought about the comfortable bedroom waiting for her, and considered the alternative of returning to her empty apartment and uncertain future. The decision, when it came down to it, was remarkably easy. "When do I start?" she asked. Jake's smile was brighter than the sunset outside. "How about tomorrow morning? We'll ease you into things, start with the books, and see how you feel about everything else." As they settled on the front porch to watch the last of the daylight fade, Sarah reflected on how quickly her life had changed. Just hours ago, she had been counting coins in a grocery store, humiliated and hopeless. Now she was sitting on a ranch porch, full and comfortable, with the promise of honest work and a fresh start. "Jake," she said quietly. "Yeah. Thank you. For everything. I know you said it wasn't charity, but what you did today, it was exactly what I needed when I needed it most." Jake rocked slowly in his chair, his eyes on the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. Sometimes the universe has a way of putting the right people in the right place at the right time. I have a feeling this is going to work out just fine for both of us. Sarah woke to the sound of roosters crowing and gentle sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the softness of the mattress beneath her and the absence of city noise outside her window. Then, the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she sat up with a mixture of gratitude and nervous energy coursing through her veins. The digital clock on the nightstand read 6:47 a.m. She could hear movement somewhere in the house, the soft sounds of someone trying not to make noise. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted under her door, making her stomach growl despite the substantial dinner she'd enjoyed the night before. Sarah dressed quickly in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday, suddenly conscious of her limited wardrobe and wondering how she'd manage until she could retrieve her belongings from her apartment in town. She'd mentioned this concern to Jake the previous evening, and he'd assured her they could make the trip whenever she was ready. She found Jake in the kitchen, standing at the stove with his back to her, tending to a pan of scrambled eggs. He wore faded jeans and a blue work shirt, and his hair was still damp from what appeared to be a recent shower. A pot of coffee sat ready on the counter, along with 2 ceramic mugs and a small pitcher of cream. "Morning," Jake said without turning around, somehow sensing her presence. "Hope I didn't wake you. I'm used to getting up early, but I tried to keep it quiet." "You didn't wake me," Sarah assured him, moving toward the coffee pot with the desperation of someone who hadn't had a proper cup in weeks. "This smells amazing." "Help yourself," Jake said, gesturing with his spatula. "Mugs are right there, and the cream's fresh from our neighbor's dairy. Mrs. Patterson brings it by twice a week in exchange for beef." Sarah poured herself a cup and took a tentative sip. The coffee was strong and rich, exactly what she needed to feel fully awake. She watched Jake work at the stove, noting the easy efficiency of his movements and the care he took with even this simple meal. "What time do you usually start your day?" she asked. "I'm generally up by 6, Jake replied, dividing the eggs between 2 plates. "Cattle need checking, horses need feeding, and there's always something that needs attention around here. But don't worry about matching my schedule right off. You need time to adjust." He set a plate in front of her loaded with eggs, bacon, and a biscuit that looked homemade. Sarah stared at the generous portion, still adjusting to the reality of having more food than she could comfortably eat. "Jake, this is too much," she protested. "I can't possibly eat all of this." "You're going to need your strength," Jake said matter-of-factly, settling into his own chair. "Ranch work builds an appetite, and you've got some catching up to do." They ate breakfast while Jake outlined the day's plans. He wanted to start her off with the office work, getting her familiar with the ranch's record-keeping system and current financial situation. After that, if she felt up to it, he'd introduce her to the horses and show her around the rest of the property. "I should warn you," Jake said, buttering his biscuit. The office is a bit of a disaster. My late wife Martha used to handle all the paperwork, and since she passed, I've been doing my best, but organization was never my strong suit. This was the first time Jake had mentioned a wife, and Sarah glanced at the family photographs she'd noticed the day before with new understanding. The blonde woman in the pictures must have been Martha. I'm sorry for your loss, Sarah said quietly. Jake nodded, his expression thoughtful but not pained. Thank you. It's been 3 years now. Martha would have loved meeting you, and she definitely would have approved of getting the books back in order. After breakfast, Jake led Sarah to a small office attached to the main house. When he opened the door, Sarah understood why he'd called it a disaster. Papers covered every available surface, bills were stacked in precarious towers, and a computer sat buried under months' worth of unopened mail. A filing cabinet in the corner appeared to be serving as storage for everything from veterinary supplies to spare printer cartridges. Oh my, Sarah said, surveying the chaos. I know it looks bad, Jake said sheepishly. I keep meaning to tackle it, but every time I sit down in here, I get overwhelmed and find something else that needs doing outside. Sarah felt a familiar spark of excitement that she hadn't experienced since losing her job. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had always enjoyed. Taking disorder and creating system from chaos gave her a sense of purpose and accomplishment that she'd been desperately missing. This is perfect, she said, rolling up her sleeves. I love organizing projects like this. It's going to take some time, but we can definitely get this sorted out. Jake's relief was palpable. Really? You're not intimidated by all this? Not at all. In fact, this is the kind of work I'm actually good at. Sarah began moving stacks of papers, doing a quick assessment of what they were dealing with. The key is to establish categories and then work through everything systematically. They spent the next hour setting up a basic system. Sarah created piles for bills to be paid, correspondence that needed responses, tax documents, and ranch records. Jake watched her work with obvious admiration, occasionally answering questions about specific documents or explaining ranch terminology she wasn't familiar with. You make this look easy, Jake observed as Sarah efficiently sorted through months of accumulated paperwork. Martha had a system, but I never really understood how it worked. Everyone's brain works differently, Sarah said diplomatically. Some people are visual organizers, others work better with lists or digital systems. The trick is finding what works for you personally. As they worked, Jake told her more about the ranch operation. They ran about 200 head of cattle on 800 acres of pasture land. Most of their income came from selling beef directly to local restaurants and farmers markets, with some additional revenue from boarding horses for city folks who wanted their animals to have access to pasture. It's not a huge operation, Jake explained, but it's profitable enough to keep the ranch going and maintain a decent living. Martha and I always believed in quality over quantity. Sarah found herself genuinely interested in the business aspects of ranch management. The direct-to-consumer model was smart, allowing them to command premium prices for their grass-fed beef. The horse boarding provided steady monthly income that helped with cash flow during seasonal fluctuations in cattle sales. By mid-morning, they had made significant progress in organizing the office. Sarah had created a system for tracking accounts receivable and had identified several outstanding invoices that needed attention. She'd also discovered that Jake was actually in better financial shape than he realized, with several paid bills that he thought were still outstanding. I can't believe you found all that money I thought I owed, Jake said, shaking his head in amazement. You've probably saved me a couple $1,000s just this morning. It's amazing what you can on.